Okay, this is episode 5 of League's Next World Champion. A show brought to you as ever by Esports Spools. And much like people who make bets and then have to live with the consequences, I'd like to revert everything I said last week. I made a flippant, offhanded comment about Lord Faker's SK Telecom. I told you don't ever pick any of their players in a fantasy tournament. They wouldn't do well. How wrong I was. Clearly, I don't know anything. All praise goes to Coma. Blessed be his name or whatever. I don't know. I'll come up with something like that. And so, I don't know. I mean, I can't lie. I secretly still think they're going to be shit. So maybe do or don't. At the end of the day, it's up to your own discretion. Fantasy. The thing about fantasy is that's actually not a game of chance. It's actually a game of skill to a degree. There's a level of choice involved in it. Right. Usual co-host, Emily Rand. Luckily, this episode, we've got a guest. So it's not just that, Emily. It's not just, hello, it's me and you again, trapped in a steel cage deathmatch, talking about League of Legends in LCK. The guest for this one is Croissant, who people might have seen on some of the Narrative Wake episodes. I mean, one of the things I like about what he does, Emily, is, first of all, he comes in off a hype train started by LS. Now, that is a fucking ominous beginning to a story, right? But you know what? He has successfully navigated not having a really obnoxious personality. So he's overcome that first part. He hasn't fallen at the first hurdle like, XJ9 or any of those other fucking people at LS that obviously could not have ever been on camera for a long time. He hasn't fallen at that hurdle. He's continued on. He's done some good episodes. Like, I like the way he has sort of like a systems approach to breaking down teams. But I'll just warn you right now, he does have like sort of a bit of an idiosyncrasy where in explaining how a team should do something, he does sort of secretly segue seamlessly into sort of a commercial for why any and all of these teams should hire him as an analyst to in fact really fix their team, not just hypothetically now. So just watch out for it. It might happen at some point in this episode.
I mean, that's smart business,
it
right?
Is.
Like,
yeah,
I can appreciate that.
Listen, he's a guy in college. He's hustling. He knows that when he gets out there into Silicon Valley or whatever, it's going to be tough times. Assuming esports hasn't become a massive sham where we all get paid like $10 million a year and we don't really know what we're doing, but all these huge companies are investing. Just kidding. That's Overwatch. Right. So let's start the episode. So here's where we're going to start, Croissant. Mm-hmm. On every other episode we've had, pretty much every one, we always start with SK Telecom because they're still the big name. They're always going to be the team, whether they do well or whether they do bad, everyone has to talk about. But the difference is on every other episode we had, I mean, entirely deservedly, we had to basically, like, de-hype them. Like, literally, like, plow them into the ground, show people that even when they would sometimes win games, it wasn't in very good fashion, and they had all these flaws with them. Like, do you buy that they've turned the corner now? Has something changed about SK Telecom, or have they figured something out they hadn't before?
So I definitely think that they have, like, the fruit of their like scrims and like the practice is showing from their latest match, but I don't think they've completely gotten out of like bottom anywhere from like 5th through 8th place team in LCK right now. And I think a lot of people are like immediately discounted the win because they noticed how weak KSV has been their last few matches.
Yes.
But I think that I don't think KSV completely just collapsed. I think SKT did things well, and it was a product of both SKT doing things well and KSV not having a very cohesive game plan. But I think that if that SKT shows up in a game against all the other LCK teams, barring like the top 3 or 4, that they would have won as well.
Okay. Right, Emily, where do you stand on that then?
So last week I talked a bit about, because it was right off of the BBQ win, I think. So I talked a bit about Blossom and how it's a lot different bringing in a solo queue jungler who's actually practiced jungling because he does have a more aggressive mindset going into the game. I think one thing I really like, because I'm not going to say like, oh man, SKT's back, because they make a lot of mistakes still. But I think the big thing that I saw from SKT that I really liked, and, this may annoy you because it means maybe Faker's going to be playing some more Galio, but they picked some really easy to execute compositions, and I think that's really good. when you're bringing in a rookie talent who doesn't have a lot of experience playing professionally. So I think like particularly the game one composition that they had against KSV, I thought was very well thought out. And again, just really simple to execute. So even if something goes wrong, it's not like you suddenly have, like you're stuck with this team. I'm thinking of CLG like yesterday. You're stuck with this team that like can't stall or like has really bad siege or whatever. So I think I really liked the fact that the team itself seems to be dedicated towards bringing Blossom on board and accepting that he's probably going to make some mistakes. So they're picking some easy to execute or like comfort team compositions.
Okay. So Croissant, one of the things that we discussed on this last episode, as Emily referenced there, that clearly does seem to be like a philosophy change for SK Telecom, is you've seen Wolf return to the lineup. Like they were using effort for most of the season. Wolf had actually only appeared as a jungler, and now he's returned. And it does seem as though, this is what we speculated, as though what they've thought to themselves is, right, well, there's too many fires here. You can't put them all out. So what we'll do is we'll have Faker, Bang, and Wolf play their normal positions. So at least we've got that stability. We've got players who've played together, and then we'll make it the top laner in the jungle. That's why we're going to experiment, bring in the rookies, bring in the subs, and just try and run that. Like, does it look like that is generally a better approach? Like, would you expect them to continue on with this lineup?
I do expect them to continue with their bot side core while they're like deciding whether they want to continue with Tal in the top lane, because I think like there's a good chance that they like switch Tal out for Intara again. I know people are really critical of Intara's performance this split and also the last split, but like Tal was definitely the weakest part of SKT in their series against KSV from what I saw. And I can see them like working through that as a team during their practices. And once they get that solidified, maybe they put effort back in later in the season, but I doubt that'll happen because at that point, like they'll have a good system going and like Wolf will probably see play for the rest of the season. So, yeah.
Okay. Right. All these questions now in general are going to be fairly wide open. Let's ask you something. So, Emily, what do you think then about the like with running Tal and Blossom? What has it added or what has it changed?
I think Blossom is super important just because, again, he's not coming in with an experienced player mindset, but he is coming in with a jungler's mindset. So I think he sees windows of opportunity that I don't think someone, for example, like Wolf, who is role swapping in the position, would necessarily see. And he's not going to make the same mistakes like Wolf's first gank where he like miscalculated the damage on Sejuani and died. And I think that is like a very much needed breath of fresh air for SKT. And if that works just to like transform their early game a bit, I think that's great. Tal is a little bit more, I still think, even though I would like to see them continue to try to play with like Tal, Blossom, like I want them to stick to this lineup and not substitute out. I think that Untara is still a more well-rounded and experienced player. I think Tal had some issues going up against Cuvée, especially in the second game, where they locked in the Trundle pick, which was, I mean, it's supposedly a good matchup. I don't think it's as like super strong as because they were flexing the Ornn and the Shen, and I think SKT didn't know which one was going to go where, if I remember correctly. And so I think they picked the Trundle thinking like, okay, if it's a Shen matchup, then we have a really good matchup. And if it's an Ornn matchup, we have a good matchup, but not a great matchup for Tal. And he got pretty bodied by Cuvée in lane. And Cuvée got camped too. So like they tried to focus that top lane and he still could not stand up to Cuvée in general. So I do think that I think SKT still want to do this thing where they have one top laner who's a carry and one top laner who's like the safer, tankier player in Untara. And you know, that's what Untara is good at. And I think Tall isn't quite there. Like he's still not. He's still having some issues trading in the 1v1 that I've seen. He's still not as coordinated with the team as Intara, to be quite honest. Even though, to Croissant's point, Intara gets dunked on a lot by the community for just not being good enough. I think he communicates with the team a little bit better when they get to 5v5 team fighting. So I'm still not sold on Tall, but I still like the fact that SKT have been willing to stick with this lineup because that's what I really wanted to see out of them.
Yeah.
Okay. Like Croissant, if we think of SK Telecom as a unit, not just individual players now.
Yeah.
Like you said that, some things have improved, it looks better. But first of all, you didn't pick them to beat like top 4 teams, top 3 teams. And you also said they still have a lot of flaws, right? As a team, what are the glaring holes still? Like where do they have to improve or what will hold them back?
Well, I think as a unit, they were actually making a lot of the moves towards there was like a slight disconnect between what Blossom wanted to do and like Faker was able to easily follow that up because he was playing Galio, and like it's really easy for Wolf to just press the Taric ult and like coordinate that kind of engage, but like the main problem is Tall, in my opinion. Just how weak his laning is could be really, really strongly exploited by Khan and like those top teams and by like junglers that really, really camp him and abuse him. But for the rest of their team, I just think it's, so I wanted to talk more specifically to the point of like what Blossom brings in terms of aggression.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So if Wolf and Faker and Bang are seen to be like really, really seasoned players, like who know how to like play from behind, play ahead, what Blossom does is he brings out the aggression in the rest of the team as well. And like one thing I found was really interesting. I agree with Emily totally that like the first composition they had against KSV was an easy to execute comp. Because you just have J4, Galio, they press Rs together, and you have like a huge AoE CC. And then the Tark ult again is like just allows the whole team to team fight. But one thing that's really, really interesting is Blossom, like if you look at his solo queue stats, he's mainly been a Kha'Zix and like a Sedrani player. And like this season and last season together, or this season he's only had 3 J4 games out of like hundreds, and he lost all 3 of them. And it's interesting to me because like J4 to me is a champion that like can be really aggressive in the early game, but you see a lot of J4s just Jarvan's not do anything and just like build Cinderhulk and then get like deleted later on in the game if they didn't use his strengths early on. And so I think Blossom showed, as Emily said, the aggression and like the mechanics that you really want in an SKT jungler. And it's moving away from the style that Blank and Bengi might be playing, but there's always the potential for like, I like for them to stay with this lineup of 5, but in the future, I do foresee Koma possibly bringing in Untara and also bringing in Blank if Blank fixes whatever issues are happening with him right now. And then I could go more specifically into the matchups in the top lane and like why I think Tall is struggling.
Come on.
Yeah. So Emily was right that Trundle was the locked in after both KSV had the Ornn and the Shen, but it was like pretty clear that they were going to run Ornn in the top lane again, and Trundle was just the last pick for SKT. So he had a wide variety of top laners to pick from.
That is actually so wild, by the way, as well, that we live in a world where there are 2 flex picks between support and top.
Yeah.
Anyway, just a sidebar, keep going.
Yeah. Season 8. But he's like, the casters love to talk about how Trundle is like, Tall's name literally means I'm going to lock in Trundle in Korean. And that's like his solo queue pick, and he played like hundreds of games of it in season 5, and then like he started to expand his champ pool in the last 2 seasons. But he was like 70 CS to like 120 against the Ornn. And what I think the casters didn't touch on enough, I'm pretty sure Papa understands this, but he just didn't talk about it, is that like Trundle just gets shit on in every single matchup, almost every single matchup, even if they're a tank, because like you don't have the luxury of just ulting people. You're not Allaire. You don't have like super strong laning 1 through 6. You have no sustain. You like get poked out by Ornn just turning on his flamethrower or whatever forge thing that is. And so you see Tall, even after getting a level 3 gank from Sedrani, getting like the assist and pushing QV out, QV just came right back and like started shitting on Tall all over again. And like Ornn has good laning, is still pretty strong, but that's one thing that KSV I think did not understand, is that Ornn has been dropping in priority a lot for teams all across the world on 8.2. And like QV is like a pretty strong laner, and he like styled on Tall also even in the Vlad Ornn matchup in the first game, but people were praising Tall because he managed to survive, and they were like, oh, if Untaro was playing, he would have solo lost SKT this game, and that's just wild to me. Like that's like the community is like really like that's one of the stupidest things I've heard, because I'm pretty sure that I could have played those champions that Tall was playing and survived, and not like, because like I started off as a top laner, like a master tier top laner could have done a lot of the things that Tall did. And like his TPs also were just really off. But like those are things that like he's getting used to on stage, and he's a rookie. So my main point is just that I'm really curious to see how SKT starts to like work with Tall on those problems, and whether he can overcome them against other teams.
Okay. Right. Okay. So Emily, even though you said that, yes, Faker might be playing more Galio, we saw another Kassadin game, and Faker this season he's won 3 of the 4 Kassadin games he's played. Obviously, like naturally, it's a champion that should suit him. He is a fucking amazing player. But I looked actually at all the other leagues. In NA, Kassadin has not been played. In Europe, it's been played something like, I think it was like 3 times. And even in LPL, it's only been played 8 times. And so in LCK, basically, I think it's been played once, aside from by Faker, and someone lost. So why is he? What is Kassadin doing for Faker, and how is he able to play it when seemingly no one else is playing it this much?
I mean, I think the way he plays it is, so first of all, it's just a comfort pick for him. But then second of all, I think the way he plays it is also important to what SKT wants to do, because he's either affecting the side lane. So like they want him to point with the Galio in the first game. They want him on something where he can potentially affect side lanes. So either roaming on Kassadin or something like Galio, where he can just ult in after 6 and just be wherever they need him to be to turn a team fight. And I think one thing that you always see with SKT whenever they're trying to integrate a new jungler, be it like Blank in season 6 when they first brought him on, be it even you saw it a lot with Wolf when he first started at the beginning of this season. Faker kind of jungles for his jungler almost. In Kassadin, even though it's not something that people look at like a Talia or a Galio and think like, oh man, this is someone who can really affect side lanes, who's just going to be all over the map. I think that Faker on Kassadin kind of fulfills that role while also giving him a little bit more like punch, if that makes sense, because it is something that he can also just straight up carry on. But if you notice the way he moves a lot in these games, some of it is just either following up on some more aggressive moves made by Blossom, even on something like a Sejuani, and then also doing small things for him that make it easier for him to roam around the map. And that's something that, again, like Faker has just done for years on a variety of different champions, where they want him on something where he can basically help out his new jungler on, again, like for every jungler he's had pretty much outside of Bengi.
Okay. Right, okay, Croissant, let's shift now. And since we were talking about the SKT KSV match, which was obviously one of the big upsets, let's talk about KSV, because this is a team where unlike so many teams in the league, they kept their entire lineup, and their lineup are the reigning world champions. So naturally, the expectation for this team, okay, SK Telecom had the expectation should be good because they're SK Telecom, but this team actually has the exact same team. And I have to say, even before this loss, they already were starting to look a bit underwhelming, and they were starting to have some games where you were like, this is getting a bit rough. And then obviously this week they've lost both games. They lost to ROX Tigers, who aren't a top team, and then now they've lost to SK Telecom, who was actually in dire straits. It should have been the time when you get your free win over SK Telecom. What do you make of KSV?
So I think Cuvée has just been... If I were to go down and look at the players, I think Ruler and Core JJ are playing about... They're just like... You don't see any of their laners just straight up demolishing or really punishing even teams like ROX and like any of their matchups. And so you have 3 lanes that either go even or like lose slightly, and then you have them constantly switching between Ambition and Haru and trying to get things done either with like Sedrani, on Ambition on Sedrani, or trying to put Haru on something more aggressive like Camille or like Rengar. And to me, it feels like a lot of their problems are draft based. And then I don't know if it's because like the players are having champion pool issues or they like just don't.
I mean, okay,
really,
how about this then? Isn't it also a flaw of this team that, while yes, that approach, which is basically what Emily was saying before with SK Telecom and their top laners, you know, like one's the carry, one's the other one. Well, that's also kind of a flaw for the draft, right? Because when I see whose name it is on the team sheet, I kind of have a hint as to where these champions are going, and the fact that Camille isn't going into the top lane, he's probably going into the jungle if it's Haru, right? So isn't that a flaw in a sense in that approach?
Yeah, I think KSV are pretty predictable, or they have been patch 8.1 and 8.2. And like one thing that made them really strong during Worlds is they sat down, they figured out like if Crown can't play these champions, like, or cannot match up in these lane matchups, then we'll put them on Malzahar or we'll put them on Lysandra that no one else is playing. And right now, like putting Crown on Cassio in game 1 against SKT, like putting Haru back on the Camille jungle. Maybe Emily can talk more about that, but it's just you don't see them having the tools. The players not only don't have tools, but like they clearly have not been like dominating scrims, or like the practice is lacking. And I don't know if it's like the team mentality, and I won't speculate on that, but all I know is that like it's not just like them getting unlucky on game day or like one person underperforming. It's a whole host of issues that like the whole team is struggling with. Okay.
What do you think, Emily?
I think, honestly, this is going to sound really weird, but I think they could take a page from ROX. Like, in terms of, because ROX are a team to me that have a great amount of flaws. But they know how to play, like, with every game. It also helps that Seonghwan and Linderong are playing a lot better this year. But in every game, I've seen them adjust and adapt to what their weaknesses are. And so you point out Crown and how he's still struggling. And even when they're putting him on stuff that you kind of know him for, like, so even if he loses lane as Talia, he's still going to be able to affect the side lanes because his map awareness is still very good. The game he won was on Zoe, which is, like, say what you want about Zoe. But I think one thing that ROX does really well is that I'm still not super sold on Lava, but I think they pick for him very well. So I'd like to see KSV actually, weirdly enough, take a page from ROX's book and say, okay, like, Crown is still struggling, so we need to make sure he gets something where he can just sit in mid and wave clear, like even trying out something like the Corki. I actually don't think Talia is a bad pick for him still. I think they can still put him on that. But stuff where he can... stuff like what they were doing at Worlds, where they were attacking bot side and they were putting Crown on stuff that he would still be useful on later in the game, but he didn't necessarily, he could just push up and maybe affect side lanes because they were expecting him to lose the lane anyway. Another thing that happened at Worlds was that Ambition was it was slightly less in the finals, but like moving up to the finals, Ambition was basically like almost leaning for crown at times, where he would he would constantly be in mid lane, or he'd be warding for mid, or he'd just be around mid to keep that as a control point on the map. And I think because this is something that has been, like, this week has been a long time coming for KSV, because we've spoken in previous episodes about how they really struggle with how do we have a strong early game, which is Haru, and how do we have better late game shot calling and neutral objective setup and team fighting, which is Ambition. And they still haven't been able to balance that. And I think the swapping back and forth now is also starting to take its toll, because neither jungler looked particularly in tune with the team this past week. And Samsung in general just looked very uncoordinated, which is actually something that's not been characteristic of them. Like, even when someone was underperforming, they were still team fighting well, right? Like, yes. They were still waiting, and they would get that awesome 5v5 late game team fight where everyone was just working together super well. And even now, like, they don't even have that. So it's a huge issue.
Mm-hmm.
So, Croissant, one of the topics, to touch on what Emily was saying now, that we've discussed many times on this show, is that part of the problem for KSV is, like, first of all, if you just look at what they seem to be trying to do with the lineup, it's clear that they're trying to groom Harrow to be the jungler, with the logic that at some point Ambition is probably going to retire and stop playing. So they don't want to just play him, but then they still do play him in one of the games each. I mean, they are losing at the moment, admittedly, which is the way Koreans often switch out. But then it seems like neither approach works, but neither approach is one you can stick with, because they either go with Haru and they put him on these strong junglers and then he tries to do stuff in the early game and at the moment they don't win, or they put Ambition in and you hope you can get to the late game and do all those great things Samsung was famous for, but KSV doesn't really get to, and then you lose that way. So it's like, pick your poison, and neither's kind of working at the moment. What's your take on that? Is there one that you would stick with out of the two?
I think the answer to that lies a lot in what Ambition's preferences, or what he sees for himself in the next year, or like even just the next split. Because is Ambition going to retire? Is Ambition going to, like, how long is his career going to continue on for? And from my perspective, if you could work with Haru on just like the moments where his brain turns off. Like, one example, like, there are these really nice moments of aggression from SKT, but they didn't have to like necessarily lead to KSV losing. What I mean by that is there were unforced errors from KSV. One example is when Bang was playing Varus, he like ult flashed over the wall of Wraiths onto Ruler, and Ruler had just like arcane shifted out, and because he was on Ezreal, and it was like cool to see Bang do that, but like he just flashed for no reason, and Ruler was about to walk away, but Haru, since he's like a Camille jungle, he sees this Varus over the wall, he's like, oh, I'm just gonna like E onto him and start hitting him, and immediately it was either a Galio ult or just like all 5 members of SKT just murdered Haru. Like, and there's no world in which you kill Bang there. And I think like those little things, it just shows that that's not something Ambition would go for, whether it's because he's like more aware or like situationally aware, or whether like Haru is just more aggressive. But like, if Ambition decides to really take Haru under his wing and like drill all the like macro things, I think Haru could like still has more potential in him, but I haven't really seen much growth in him for like a while, and I just don't know what KSV's process is, because I'm pretty sure they kept the same coach too. Even with the organization change, they like picked up the same players, the same coaches and staff. But right now, I think things are looking really grim for them, and that they like, I see them possibly even being like dropping out of playoffs, and SKT being more towards the like where KSV was towards the start of the season.
Okay. So Emily, then, let's discuss what he just said there, then, because that is the thing, isn't it? Is that if KSV really is on this slide down, and it's not just a couple of losses. Well, as we discussed on the last episode, this is by far the most wide open season. Like, you look at some of the teams below them. Okay, yeah, we know ROX has shown us some things. Like SK Telecom actually now just beat them already. Jin Air's half decent. Barbecue Oliver's bizarrely is down at 8th, even though they've had many good games to split. I mean, if you start to sort of give way and show weaknesses, there's a lot of teams can kind of feast on you that aren't even the top team. So where do you see KSV going? Do you think that they are going to sort of stabilize?
If they don't figure stuff out, I see them fitting at about where Samsung fit previously, which would be like, I think 3 through 5 kind of area. And then it also depends on, so like KSV, it seems like what they have to work on is very obvious, but they're still not working through it. Whereas SKT, with the new jungle setup, with the new top side, they at least, I guess there's more, I hate to use the word potential, but like there's more potential there, I guess, for growth. Because to Croissant's point, the only like real huge point of growth for KSV is going to be in Haru and developing him into a jungler that knows when to pick his engages better, that knows how to set up for Baron is something else that I really look at. And I see just such a huge difference between the way KSV would set up with Ambition and the way KSV would set up with Haru. And SKT can bump up, even though they obviously start at like a very large deficit. BBQ is like the most frustrating team to me in the entire LCK right now, based on some of their games this past week, where they either come out like super strong early and they have a really good game plan, and I've actually really liked some of their compositions. I think it plays super well to their strengths, and they just cannot figure out their mid-game transitions no matter who is playing in the jungle. Like it's so frustrating. It's that team. But if they do figure it out, you then have this huge cluster of Jin Air, ROX, like I said, are performing really well. I think they understand the limitations of their team and play around them very well. I think they've figured out how to balance the carry potential of Songyun versus their strong performing top side right now. So it's very troubling for KSV if they can't figure things out, because even though they still have this world championship team, if they can't find what won them the world championship, which is this kind of strong map awareness and strong, really, really strong 5v5 team fighting, which they didn't even have this past week, that's a huge issue, because there are teams that will take series or games off of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, something I actually want to ask as like a final kind of point on the KSV one before we move on, is that actually when you were saying that about how predictable they are in the draft, like another detail I looked up was that basically all the top supports except Core JJ and Gorilla play on, and it's at least a possibility that it could be flexed when it's picked. Now, Gorilla, he can get away with not doing it because he basically can't beat his team in the draft right now and they can just play anything they want. Isn't it a bit more of a problem for KSV in as much as they basically there's kind of nothing that's hidden in their draft, right? You know what they're going to do. You know where things are going. I mean, they can't really get edges there, right?
Yeah, I think Core JJ, I think the entire team, you could say that like QV, Core JJ, Ruler, they have like specific picks that they don't play. But I think it's how their picks come together, right? It would be fine for me if Core JJ only played Taric and like Braum and certain supports that aren't Ornn, if Ambition or Haru were playing like Zac, and there's like a really good synergy between the Taric W and the Zac flying through, and I just want to see those proactive decisions made before draft and then like implemented during the game, because I see KZ like experimenting with certain picks, and like doesn't matter if Gorilla doesn't pick, as you said, a couple of picks because he knows what he wants. But CoreJJ, he's not playing terribly, but he's just picking some champions, going into lane, like doing a little bit of 2v2 and then getting smashed like towards the mid game. And I do think that I was a little bit overly critical of KSV during when I was talking earlier. Just that I still see them making playoffs. I still see them like obviously like it's dangerous if they don't make the correct adjustments and other teams like Jin Air and ROX overcome them. But at the end of the day, these are world-class players and like they're clutch and they their caliber. I think if I had to bet on them during like a couple of weeks from now in playoffs or in like important matches, I would still go for them. I'm thinking about it. When I look at these teams and we talk about like LCK or LCS, this like halfway through the season, I just try to see how much they're growing and how they'll stack up against like the very top competition, and you can see that growth from KZ and Africa and those teams. So
okay.
Yeah.
Right, well, since you say it stack up against the top competition, by far and away the top competition is Kingzone Dragon X. And they are now on, basically, the only games they lost were those first two where they didn't have Khan because he had that like suspension. And then ever since then, they have literally just steamrolled the league. I mean, let me double check now. I think they've won 14 games in a row, which might even be like, I mean, it can't be a record because obviously SKT had the 15 at one point in time, but it's got to be up there. It's got to be like already historic levels of dominance. This week, they played against Jin Air Green Wings, who is a team that, okay, has some potential. And these weren't like mega stomps, right? So what does this show us? Like, did Kingzone still impress? Is actually Jin Air, did they give them a decent game? What do you make of where Kingzone is right now, Croissant?
So I did not get a chance to watch the Jin Air Green, the Jin Air
Okay, just give us more general thoughts then.
I think that Khan and Peanut Khan was playing like Nar, which I haven't seen that much from him before, and was also playing GP, and then Peanut was just playing Jax, and I have like a lot of thoughts about Jax jungle in particular, but I think generally Kingzone, even if they do look like they're not closing out as efficiently as they can be or are a little bit weaker, I don't think that or like aren't as dominant as their record shows. I think like when it comes to if they have to play against SKT or if they have to play against Africa and one of the top teams, I think like I'm not saying they're taking certain games less seriously, but I think that they just step it up a notch for some of their matches, and I think maybe some of the problems against Jin Air are like systemic with their setup or with their vision control, but I don't see any weaknesses that they showed during that series, this latest series, as being exploitable by anyone in LCK. Maybe by like a really aggressive team from the LPL during like a mid-season invitational, but right now I don't have too much to say on that matter.
Okay, all right, come on then, Emily. What did you make of this?
So I thought actually this is gonna sound really weird since we just spent the past like 10 minutes kind of dunking on KSV for their issues, but I feel like a top form based on what we saw from the Jin Air series, which is Jin Air basically gave up like a ton of stuff on the map and just kind of slowly got pushed back, and then again they found like their perfect setups and their team fights, and Grace got the Zoe paddle star to pick someone off, and Teddy is on late game Caitlyn, so he just mows down stuff. They come to a Nexus push, and instead of turning to fight, they decide to hit the Nexus, which is kind of hilarious because usually it's the opposite, right? Usually It's like, don't turn to fight, hit the Nexus. This was, don't hit the Nexus. You have the stronger team fighting like composition here. And they didn't do it, and they lost. We've seen so many Nexus mistakes here. Like this.
Where was the connection to KSV? Were you going to say something like that Jin Air was like a weaker version of KSV, and KSV would have
I'm going to say
series?
A KSV that is on point with Crown performing or on something where he can team fight late game and push out waves early. the 5v5 kind of monster that we saw previously, that is a team that actually I think might be able to beat Kingzone Dragon X. Okay. But right now, there's no team in LCK like that at all.
I mean, to be fair, Jin Air's drafts look basically like they could be a fucking KSV draft if you look at who they tick in these games.
Again, like we keep returning to Jin Air, and like they know where, like I keep saying this, that like they know where their bread is buttered. Like they know that they need the late game Teddy team fight, right, where they can just set up Teddy and Teddy can pop off. And it didn't actually necessarily happen in the series because they didn't team fight at the Nexus, but they a team that picks for 5v5 that can not give up, because I do think Jin Air gave up too much in this game one that we're talking about. They gave up way too much on the map, but a team that can give up just enough to then fight mid game around either turrets, dragons, or barons and get those 5v5 engages that they want and have better vision control. I think that is a team like the top tier KSV. The best that we can see out of KSV is a team that could take out Kingzone Dragon X. But right now, that team does not exist.
Okay. Croissant, what about this then? I alluded to it before, but if you've won 14 games in a row in the LCK, that is historic level stuff. You know, you already have to be asking yourself questions like, are they going to win this LCK and with ease? Are they going to go and win Worlds? Are they going to, you know, in theory, everything's on the table when you have that kind of dominance. Is that appropriate, do you think? Do you think Kingzone is looking like a historically great team?
I think people are afraid to even, I haven't even seen it be mentioned that like, oh, they're going to just roll over everyone. Of course, they're like number one in the rankings, like ESP rankings, everything. But like, we have to remember that Prey and Gorilla have been on a couple of teams that have just dominated.
Tigers, mate.
Yeah,
I remember.
Yeah, like it would be hilarious if KZ like go to MSI and then they just get demolished at the mid-season invitational, as unlikely it would be. But like people don't have the same like faith in the back of their mind that they might have for SKT when they look strong, or for even Samsung now. So I think that I do see that, as I said, like I don't think KZ will have any trouble with any of the teams as they are right now, and like until the end of the split. I think I don't see that. Like I don't see KT, I don't see SKT unless they really, really figure out their system right now. But Afrika is interesting because like I think Afrika has like a cap to like how high they can go. But I think that if they really, really prepare their draft well, and if they like get everything that they want, and KZ has an off day, then yeah, they could win the spring split for LCK. Okay. But yeah.
Okay, so Emily, what's your take on this? Like, I mean, what's bizarre is Croissant himself did it there. He also agreed that, these are great numbers, everything's gone so well. But somehow, I don't know how this exists, people are scared to just say the team that's smashing everyone and so far almost can't lose is also going to win the championship. And you know what? As the title of the fucking show goes, should therefore win Worlds logically. I mean, I have to say, like I still think to this day that the last lineup they had was the best team at Worlds. I think that they faced the only team that could have beaten them at exactly the right time to face them. And after a very weird group stage where Samsung basically almost got like tooled up to be able to beat them. Otherwise, I think they would have won Worlds with the old lineup, and then now they put in Peanut. He looks good. I think this could be like, this has to be a contender for like, could go on to be the best team ever in League. You don't agree?
I think there are a few factors in play in terms of why people won't like crown them yet, right? And one is like the fact that the SKT still exists, so there's like that weird thing in the back of your mind. I think the other thing is that they're clinging on, right? I think the other so a byproduct of that is that people again, we've spoken to this before. This is a very wide open split. Longzhu lost to Samsung, which is now KSV. RNG are the secret champions of Worlds because they trained up KSV to attack the bot side. But then you have you have a lot of teams in the middle that I think people are still not sure where they fit. And then additionally, you have three of the, so like not only is this a team that lost 0-3 at Worlds to KSV, but then they also brought on Peanut. So now you have 3 of the 5 ROX Tigers, and the ROX Tigers famously could not ever get over their SKT hump, right? Like the one LCK they won was against KT because KT had the good grace to take out SKT before getting to finals. So I think that's also probably in the back of people's mind, where it's just like the joke that everyone has to go through Prey in order to win a world championship because he's been in that position so many times.
He's just like the butler who's like,
before on Najib
the silver
and then
thing.
on ROX
He's like,
Tigers,
dinner is served, sir. And then you just eat your course where you win the championship. Cheers.
So I think that's a lot of it. I think this is a very good team. Myself, I'm still hesitant, and I'm not sure if it's just because of this like perception of what they've done in the past. I do think that one thing that bodes really well in their favor, to Croissant's point, is that even though Khan is still known as like, he pulled out the ribbon and he stomped, we've also seen him pick slightly less aggressive but more team oriented champions. And I think that's actually really important because obviously one of the glaring flaws of the previous Longzhu lineup, in addition to the fact that Cuz was just not as good of a jungler as Peanut is, was that you had Khan, who could really only play this carry split push style. And we've seen the team itself try to, push him to be a little bit more of a flexible player. And I think that's really worked in their favor. So if there's anything that really gives me hope for Kingzone being or becoming this kind of historic team, it's that Khan is looking like, previously I was always the one who was a little bit cooler on Khan, I think, than a lot of other people. I value players like Juve very highly, who can play multiple different styles. Like Smeb also is that kind of player. And I think we're seeing Khan slowly become a more flexible player, which I actually think is really important for the team, as well as just the fact that mid-jungle synergy has improved immensely between BDD and Peanut, and that's actually huge because Peanut can do a lot more in the jungle than Cuz ever could.
Okay, because here's the thing. I mean, people will have heard me rail against the concept that exists in so many regions and in history that, like, if a team's ever super dominant, everyone wants to be like, oh, they have all the best players at their position, or they have 4 of the best players. And normally, I'm always on the other side. Normally, I rail against it. Like, of course they don't, you idiot. Like, I mean, just look at TSM this season, by the way. If you ever thought Hunter was some god top laner who couldn't be fucking stood with. Oh, what a shame. The Schadenfreude fills up my black little heart. No, but the point I'm making is, this is actually one of the few times where I think you can actually say it. This team is fucking so loaded, it's unreal. And it's like a true team that everyone like could be the best in that. It's not even just name value. You just look at them how they're playing now. It's amazing. So I don't know, I'm all in. I'm going. I have no such reservations.
I just, I can see BDD like winning the split. Calling BDD a world champion, I don't see that happening. Like every single player, like they all have the potential to be the best in their role, like at some point during the split, but like none of them can be. All of them have like moments where they just collapse in some way. Like Khan feels like he's exceptionally strong on this specific thing, on this and he's like shown a lot more flexibility recently, right? Like we haven't seen him play Jason like several series. And then Peanut, people always questioned, oh, he's an excellent aggressive jungler, but can he play things that aren't Nidalee or Kha'Zix? Yes. And yeah,
he was actually the inspiration for one of my videos, which I actually think I sort of nailed it. It was called the mechanical jungler fallacy, which is if someone's a godlike player on the aggressive champions, for some reason, everyone in their brain thinks, well, if you can do that on the mechanical champions, or anyone could just play Zac and press R. But it's like, actually, they can't. There's a certain mental mechanics, essentially, that you don't necessarily have just because you have it as a sick fucking Rengar player or something, you know.
Yeah. And so it's a matter of, do I think Gorilla and Peanut are going to direct or I don't know if Prey is the captain or like what their team dynamic is, but like, do they have the mental fortitude to continue being at the top for so long, right? And do they have someone that they all look to as a leader? And like Prey and Gorilla are so experienced, but they still, I don't think this is like their year, like season 8, they're the world champions. And like, that's because it's spring, right? Like I would, if this were summer split, then it would be a lot easier to make certain predictions or just like say how I feel.
Okay. Right. Well, I would never want you to say how you feel, Croissant. Just keep it entirely analytical, mate. This is not a fucking confessional. It's not Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay, so let's move on then. So you referred to them before. Obviously, in the standings, one of the key teams that everyone looks to is like, maybe this team could be the one that unseats Kingzone. Because for me, I've described them in the past shows. They are the most exciting team in the entire LCK. It is a freak of freaks. This team that with this lineup, again, this is another really stacked lineup. You look at how everyone's performing in the team, looks fantastic. The results have been amazing. They've lost very few games. What do you make of the new Africa?
Emily? Oh, me? Me first?
Yeah.
I think Spirit is the only jungler who should be playing Jungle Camille. That's my rant. Because, like, quick rundown, Croissant can probably expand on this a lot more, but the reason why Camille is such a strong jungler is because even though her clear is actually fairly slow, she can do these really fantastic early game ganks if you path correctly. Like, so she can vary her pathing, or you can just farm up and then team fight, which is actually oddly enough, despite the fact that he's kind of gained a reputation as a super aggressive jungler, Spirit actually has been content to farm a little bit more than what you would expect someone trying to really exploit what Jungle Camille can do. But I think first of all, he just had some like godly mechanical outplays this past week. But then also, I think he's someone who actually understands the champion a bit more rather than just leaving himself open to vulnerabilities by farming up. And I just see so many people locking in Jungle Camille and then either not taking advantage of what she can do early, like score, where it just becomes kind of a waste. And if the game snowballs out of control, you then can't do anything as a Jungle Camille, really. But I think the way that Africa has come together also allows Spirit to play that champion. So that's my Jungle Camille rant. As for the rest of Africa, I just really like watching this team. They're very fun, and they've. I spoke to this last week a bit, but previously they were always known as the team with like one really good game plan for one specific game. But I now think because of this newfound flexibility that they have, they really can go into individual games with different game plans and still like they can show something completely different and still have it work for this team. I mean, even Kuro got to pop off on LeBlanc the other day, right? Which is not something you really see in the LCK right now. And not, despite the fact that Kuro is a good LeBlanc player, not something we've seen from him in quite a while. Because previously he was always really stuck in being like the most efficient wave clear mid possible. So I think that's what makes this team so fun, is the fact that they seem to have really good preparation coming in, and they seem to draft around whatever strategy they have going into that game.
Okay. All right, come on, Croissant.
So it's really incredible, as Emily said, to see the diversity of like game plans that Africa has, and like to that same point, like the diversity of picks that they have. I don't know much about Keen's history as a player, but like he played 2 games of Rise top this last week, and no one else has been playing that, and like they executed it really, really well. Spirit has always been someone who likes unconventional picks like Lulu jungle and like just theory crafting. But right now he's playing like Jax jungle, Camille jungle, and really understanding what he needs to be doing in early pathing and then also in the mid game and what their objectives are. And then like Kramer and Tucson are an exceptional bot lane. Like one thing I really like about like Prey has always been known for his Ashe and like specific utility AD carry picks, but like the vast majority of their games has just been for KZ has been Prey on Ezreal, and then like a little bit of Kalista, like, and I think something like 8 out of the last 10 games. But if you look at Kramer, he's like playing Varus and playing Kalista and Ezreal, and also doing really well on the Rakan Messiah. And so given that, like, I think that they have a lot of really strong points that can only be neutralized by like a really, really dominant mid laner that would like shut down Kuro, and even though Kuro is playing really well. And I don't see like their bot lane or their top lane ever getting really punished in a 1v1 or 2v2 scenario. It would have to come from like a jungler outplaying Spirit. So like Afrika has been like maximizing, and I said earlier that I felt like they have like kind of reached their peak because but that mainly goes for like Spirit and Kuro and Tucson. But I think Keen like is also a wild card that I don't really understand enough as a player. But the point is that Afrika on their good day can challenge KT and can like definitely crush KSV or SKT if they have the right game plan. And I don't think they've played KZ yet. Their 2 losses. Yeah, their losses were KZ and KSV. So like,
and the KZ loss was one of those horrible Nexus things where it was like down to like 50 hit points or something.
So, yeah, like I think they're the main team to watch in their next game against KZ, because Keen can potentially take down Khan if Spirit like plays to that, and then Kuro can handle Kuro and BDD are just going at it in the mid lane, playing Gallia or whatever, and then the bot lane. I think Kramer and Tucson are a good matchup for Prey and Gorilla.
Okay, so Emily, the matchup he's set up is the very matchup that we will get next week. It is the KZ versus Afrika Freak. So what are your thoughts on Afrika at the moment?
Just to fill in a little bit about Keen, because he was a player that I had my eye on coming into this year. He was previously on Ever 8, and the two players that everyone was looking at from Ever 8 were Malrang and Septed, which is their jungle mid duo. Yep. And Keen was kind of this like carry player who did really well in lane, but then didn't transition it well. And Ever 8 was just kind of a bad team. Even though they had really strong players. The thing that stuck out to me about Keen when I first started noticing him was actually in the Kespa Cup when he played Shen for the first time. And he had surprisingly good team fight awareness. And I was like, oh, okay, this is something I didn't see from him, when he was playing like Renekton. So that was what kind of gave me hope for Keen being such a flexible player, which he has, I feel, turned out to be. So that's why I really like him. And actually, to your point, that's one of the reasons why I think he would probably be able to stand up to Khan in a 1v1, just because he does seem like he can play both styles of top lane. As for the Afrika Kingzone matchup, one thing that I do think Kingzone have become really good at is punishing mistakes. And so for Afrika, it's going to be about how well they can execute. Because again, like they are going into games with a very clear mindset from pre-draft to what they draft to executing that draft. I feel like that's been a strength of theirs even since last year. And then this year, they've just honed that even more, where they are a much more flexible team and they can go in with a variety of different styles. But I think right now, the thing to watch out for them is whether they make some of these mistakes. And I don't know if it was just because it was against MVP, which are not a strong team. But we did see some kind of over aggressive mistakes from them, that against a better team like Kingzone, they will immediately punish. And that can have the potential, depending on what their game plan is going in, to ruin what Afrika wants to do based on their draft. So I think they'll have to play a lot tighter than what I saw from them this past week in order to stand a chance of knocking off Kingzone in the series. I certainly think they can take a game, but in terms of whether they can beat them in a series, I think it's really going to come down to how many mistakes this team makes. Because right now, I feel like between the two, Kingzone are making a lot fewer mistakes, and that means that they'll be able to capitalize on certain things that Afrika do that a team like this past week we saw MVP couldn't really do. And if it comes down to individual outplays, well, both teams have really strong players in every position. So it should be a really, really interesting matchup to watch.
Okay. So, Croissant, why is it significant then that Keen's been playing Ryze in the top lane? Obviously, it's a mid lane champion generally now. What is his place in the meta of the top lane?
So I just have not seen anyone play Ryze in LCK this split other than Keen in top lane. Emily,
it's just Flandra, I think, in LPL.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it's Flandra, so that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone.
Yeah. It just shows that like the teams that are looking at, prioritizing, those picks are when the team has like feels like they have like these strong fundamentals, or like the rest of the team the core is stable, and then they're like, how can we get this extra edge, and how can we catch the other teams off guard? And that's what SKT was trying to do with like Tall and those picks, and this is what Keen and Khan has been really good at doing that just all throughout the split with Riven, and he's always been like, Longzhu or KZ have always wanted to play towards that, to really punish people, because like the way that League is played, like the standard meta is standard for a reason, but that doesn't mean that it's that doesn't mean it's impenetrable to very focused attacks towards like a specific part of the map or specific player. And I think that if there were to be any upset with KZ, it would have to be through Khan, as the least, because when we talk about, like as Emily mentioned, people who make mistakes, like Khan is the type of player to like want to do this speed run perfect game, like really take every possible advantage that he can from the enemy top laner, right? And I know that myself as that kind of player and him as that kind of player, like you become frustrated when you're set back at that, and of course, if the rest of his team is taking advantages and punishing the other side of the map, then like it's easy to regain focus. But if you look at like Afrika's bot lane versus KZ's bot lane, those are Kramer, Prey, like those are players that really, really rarely make mistakes. BDD is a similar player. Kuro makes a little bit more mistakes than BDD, and then Spirit as well versus like Peanut. But it's just, you have to look at that top lane, and if Keen pulls out something that Khan isn't prepared for, or he just can't deal with on his own, and Peanut isn't able to offer up enough support, or BDD can't roam and like rebalance that matchup, then like that's a clear win condition for Afrika to just and that's like when you look at Golden Guardians, Lorelo pulls out the Alawi, like sometimes those picks are really what it gives you a fighting chance. And most teams don't need to resort to that because they believe in like what they practiced in, and like that they can just play standardly. But it's the X factor that I am always thinking about, like what can this team do more of, and what can they pull out that gives them like a 60-40 instead of just like a 55-45 winning through fundamentals.
Okay, right. I've got a question now, which is literally not a trick question. It's just me as a layman. I want to get your take on it, both of you. Okay, so first of all, I'll set it up by just explaining why it's a question for me. I hate it when people use narratives to decide things like MVP award, because the MVP award is by definition an individual award which then connects into team factors. So, for example, I hate it when someone gets the MVP in a game or a season because, you know, they joined a team that was like good, and then because they joined, it became the best. But that doesn't necessarily mean they were the best player even on the team, you know. So I am always very wary. Like, I'll give you a quick analogy, okay? Let's say TSM turned it around this season and won an ALCS. And let's say Mike Young was a big factor as to why, like, you know, he became very competent as a jungler. He wouldn't be the MVP for me because the best player in the team very likely would still be Bjergsen. So it doesn't matter what Mike Young did, because logically, if he'd been on another team and done the same things, they wouldn't have turned it around. So if you can kind of see the rationale there, what I'm now going to set up is this question that I never thought I would ever ask anyone about the LCK, which is, could Kuro actually be the MVP of the LCK? Because as an absolute layman, when I watch some of these games, he looks really good, but is he actually the best player in his team? Is he succeeding by some byproduct of other people's play? Give me kind of your take on it, both of you.
So Kuro tied for MVP last split with BDD. So he's already won MVP previously. Whether you think he was the best player or not,
yes, a real one, Emily. Yes.
I just wanted to check that off because I know people watching will be like, well, he's already won an MVP. Right now, the player who is in the lead on his team is actually Twch, who has had, honestly, like a very stellar year that I was not expecting out of him. Do I think Kuro could be the MVP of this team? Based on who is playing the best, I think, like on the Freaks specifically, I think it is actually between Kuro, and then also I think Spirit has been performing really well despite the fact that he hasn't been racking up those MVP points. Like I said, he understands what you do on a jungle Camille if you just farm, and if you remember, farming and team fighting has always kind of been his thing. Before he started to get a more aggressive, like before the narrative kind of built around him as like the super aggressive carry jungler when he was on WE, because he was by far and away their best performing player. He was always the jungler who held back and farmed and then team fought with his team on blue. And so I actually think that even though I've been hesitant to crown Spirit as like this ridiculously strong jungler in the past, I think what I've seen from him this past split has been really good, surprisingly so. So for me, in terms of who is the best performing player on that team right now, I would actually give it to Kuro, or I would give it to Spirit, because I think Spirit has actually performed very well, and I think he is one of the reasons why Afrika is still like this, has become this like super flexible team.
Croissant, Kuro MVP.
Yeah, so I don't follow MVP points in any or
I don't mean in that sense. I mean for like the real MVP. Yeah.
But I definitely think that like Twch and Kuro, like, it's all about like the next few weeks, right? Who can rise above like their previous limits, right? Twch has always been like a pretty decent support, but yeah, this is maybe his best split so far. And so if he like pushes like that more and more and continues to rack up the points, like he's 600, Deft is 500, and then you got like a bunch of people tied for 400, and then you got a bunch of people tied for 300, including Spirit. But I think I don't see Kuro just massively stepping up and stomping like BDD, for example, in the Afrika KZ matchup. Like from the series that I have watched, he's been a solid player, but he gets targeted by other teams, and he like soaks up the pressure pretty well, but he doesn't soak up the pressure in the way that like I think Faker would, or I think and so like I think Kuro will always have like the difficulty of crowning a mid laner MVP is that you will have the competition between Crown, between Faker, between BDD. And then for Twch, his competition is like Gorilla, who is like 200 points, and I don't even think there are any other supports in the top like 10 or so. So like the fact that he is up there means that he's doing things and he's having an impact that no other player is in his position. And I think that deservedly, he's not this new player to come into the team and change everything, but he's been a stable player for so long, been with Kramer, and they've just been solid. So I think that if Kuro really steps up, then like I think he will win because he'll deserve it. But right now, I haven't been like, I've been impressed with how he's playing, but I haven't been like, he's not impressed me enough to the point where I'm willing to just say this is definitely what should be happening, you know.
Okay. Right, Emily, you touched on them before, the ROX Tigers. Now, this is another team that keeps rolling, and if anyone thought there was going to be this drop-off, it hasn't come yet. I mean, they're another team that, despite Jin Air having good games, are getting wins off Jin Air. So what do you think Tigers are at right now? Are they actually going to go higher?
I'm not sure if they can go higher, just because based on their competition.
Pretty high already. They are fifth.
Yeah, yeah. I actually think like they're very good. Like there's something to be said for, again, a team that can recognize like where we are weak and where we are strong, and this is how we're going to play around where we're strong. And previously this split, they had some issues with that, balancing their protect the Cog mod comp against diving in and dying and leaving Cog to fend for himself and die. But I think you have a team that just basically understands their weak points and how to play around them. And I think they've figured that out more quickly than maybe other teams. I think Jin Air is kind of a tragedy because they're also a team that is, I think, pretty well aware of how they need to play. And they've had some really close losses. The ROX Jin Air series is actually quite close. And I mean, the weird thing about ROX is, again, I can't see them going much higher because the problem then becomes how do our players individually stack up against the individual players on the top three teams if we're looking at KT, Afrika, and Kingzone. And unfortunately for ROX, it's very difficult to see them being able to outperform a team like that. Like they would basically have to play perfectly. And we have not seen ROX play perfectly at all. They've played well around and they've drafted to their strengths. But I think in order to overcome one of those top teams, they would need to play without making mistakes, because that's what they have to do with the players they have, who might be slightly worse mechanically and individually than the players on the top teams. Even a team like KT, who didn't have a super good week last week, like going up against ROX, they they won the first game and then they kind of like gave ROX the second game, and then the third game was a bit closer. So, but I think in those kind of matchups, the favor will always be with the team that has the stronger mechanical players and can also draft to their strengths. And I think that's what you see from the top three teams, whereas that's where ROX kind of falls off, despite the fact that right now they're like the top of the mid tier, in my opinion.
Okay, so Croissant, the weird thing about ROX is, yes, they are in a good position. They're fifth in the league. They've had all these wins. They've had some good games, as Emily says. But they're one of those teams where, to Westerners, there's no names on this team. There's no big star names. I mean, funnily enough, the name that always jumps out to me the most is just Key, because I remember him on that rubbish ESC Ever team that inexplicably won that tournament over like SK Telecom or whoever it was. So, what do you make of this squad? Because they must be doing something right if they don't have the big names.
Yeah. So, as Emily mentioned earlier, Linda Rong and Song Hwan have like stepped up, and they have been playing solidly. And players like Lava have like they love playing Azir, and they're pretty decent on picks like Zoe. But they're still just second rate. players. And Songyun and Key do their job in the bot lane, and Key had that like the community perception lifts up certain players for like a brief period of time, and then they like drop down because they're just not consistent enough. Like you can say like MVP 10th place team, Max was getting so much the support for MVP. Max, he was getting so much praise last season for like playing Scion support and like getting destroyed in lane, but then having like a big play with his ult or like a 5-man queue. And I think consistency is what the team lacks, and they have strong points in all of their players actually, but they're like the players who are can have good matchups, can like have standout performances, but when they get exploited or when they get targeted, like they can't absorb the pressure well enough, and then that affects all the other players too. And so that's just ultimately what prevents them and will prevent them from being a top 4 team. And I think that certainly like I see SKT overpassing them in the next few weeks.
Okay. Emily, what do you think?
The other thing that I didn't mention is that I think they've played really well in the meta, specifically around, they basically took the BBQ Oliver's blueprint of playing around Spellbook, and they've also used that pretty well. But yeah, I mean, the problem is that I really can't see them going, like I mentioned previously, I really can't see them going further. And then if you look at the teams that they are with, they can still easily, like if you tell me that SKT beats them now, with Blossom in the lineup, I believe it. If you tell me that Jin Air beats them now, even though they just narrowly lost to ROX last week, I believe it. So it's one of those things where you tell me that ROX loses to any of these mid-tier teams, and then obviously the top 3 teams, and I definitely believe it. So the problem for me is that I think right now, despite the praise that I gave ROX for playing really well around what they have, I can't see them moving forward, which means that these teams that might not have reached their peak, like I think Jin Air can still improve, for example. I think obviously SKT, as Croissant brought up, is another team that we're probably going to see rise in the next coming weeks. And then KSV, if they figure their stuff out, they're also going to be a more difficult team for ROX to beat, despite the fact that obviously ROX kicked off by knocking out KSV in their series. I think it's more a matter of like, can ROX show us something more than what they've shown right now? And based on what I've seen, I don't think so. I'd like to be pleasantly surprised. Like I'd love for this team to suddenly, keep rising and rising, but I just don't see it with the assortment of players that they have right now.
Okay. Like Croissant, what do you think of Jin Air Green Wings?
It's just, when I first started watching League, or when I first started watching LCK, I didn't understand why anyone would like or be a fan.
Was, what the gimmick was, yeah.
And yeah, like they have a particular play style. They like to play through Teddy, and they have that condition, and that's just so limiting, right? Like, are they going to have Sohwan popping off in the top lane in the way that like Keen or Khan or and Umti just seems really lackluster to me as well. And that's the thing, like I've successfully avoided advertising myself to like a team and like this whole.
But why should Jin Air pick you
You're
up?
You're going to advertise
what would
yourself
you
to
fix?
Jin Air?
Yes. Who's going to fix Jin Air? This is called Croissant's mechanics
Of all
segment.
teams,
Yes.
of all teams.
Let's go.
Yeah, it's like Jin Air has done what I would try to do with a team like that, right? Like, really, they know themselves, but they don't know how to improve beyond that because, like, they have
Is it
picked
even
players.
possible?
Yeah, they've picked players to and resign themselves to like, this is how we're going to play. And like, I think maybe if you paired like Teddy with a like really, really lane dominant support, or maybe if the meta changes, and like, yeah, KZ, who's just playing a lot of Ezreal, maybe Ezreal goes like really down the priority list and everybody has to start playing Lucian and Vayne or something. Yes. Maybe like we can see Jin Air starting to rise up again, and make contend for a playoff spot. But right now, their top side just seems a little bit too weak to me. And I am not super familiar with all the players, but I think that's because like if I watch them in a game, I'm noticing them make more mistakes than like the players on KT or KZ, etc. So I don't have high hopes for them at all.
Okay. Right. Emily, is there any faith left in Jin Air?
I mean, again, like, so of the middle of the pack teams, I actually think outside of BBQ, who I don't know if we'll talk about, but I kind of ranted about earlier, I think Jin Air still has like room to grow. A lot of it comes from the fact that they have 2 brand new mid laners still, which is something I've harped on about this team for a while and will continue to do so, just because mid is such an important pressure point on the map, and neither mid laner has shown a good ability to deal with either continuous pressure from their opponents if the other team decides to attack mid. And then additionally, that also affects what can do, despite the fact that kind of does what he wants regardless. I think has looked better as a jungler, but again, like it's one of those things where you see this guy and he has mechanical skill and he sometimes pulls off these really smart invades, and then other times he continues to invade when he really shouldn't, or he makes an aggressive move when he really shouldn't. And it actually really, really costs the team. Like against Kingzone, we saw it in game 2 where they immediately capitalized on an early mistake from So that is a huge issue. And then Sohwan, I think, has become a lot better of a player than what he was previously, which I think is really good. And I think he's actually fine if they're mid laners. Like, the mid lane is still the really important spot for me on this team. And I don't know if it's just because, to me, mid lane is just such a ridiculously important position in League of Legends in terms of wave control, in terms of vision control. But that is still the issue for me with this team. And I think if they do manage to bring up their mid laners just a little bit more, that actually changes a lot of what happens on the map. Like, it frees up a lot more. It means that some of the more aggressive mistakes he makes won't necessarily be as punishable. It means that they would be able to play around topside a lot better. It also could mean that Wraith, depending on the way the bot lane meta shifts, which I don't foresee this happening in 8.3, but in terms of whether they can free up Wraith to roam, which is what he's far more, as Croissant pointed out, he's far more better roaming as more of a jungler support or a mid laner support than he is as a 2v2 laner, which is actually fine because Teddy can hold his own in lane very easily and has in the past. So I'm still looking at the mid lane with this team. And maybe that's just because I'm always laser focused on mid as a control point, but I think that is a huge issue. And I think if they are able to bring up either mid laner, they still seem pretty committed to Grace. If they are able to bring him up to the point where he is like just okay, that suddenly changes the team a lot. Like, it frees up a lot more for them. But right now, that's not happening. It is something where I can see, weirdly enough, I can see more potential in Jin Air, even if they don't end up like seeing that out. I can see a little bit more potential in a Jin Air team rather than the ROX Tigers team, because I think right now we're seeing kind of the maximum of what the Tigers will be able to do, where we haven't seen that out of Jin Air, just because they still have some of these really young players that haven't reached their full ability. But I don't know if that's just weirdly optimistic. And again, it really depends on how the mid lane goes.
Okay. Croissant. Mm-hmm. Is Teddy the best AD carry in the LCK?
Like, that's a question that I'm not qualified to answer, because I would have to watch at least
pleading the fifth. Okay.
Yeah, but it's like, I mean, I know other analysts have said really good things about him, and I have like watched.
Based on what you've seen. I mean, listen, he plays with Jin Air Green Wings. I'm assuming you've maybe seen like half his games, just the games versus the top teams, right?
Yeah, I've seen him trying to do like so much, but like at a certain point, you can't gauge how good an AD carry is if they have to play defensively for the first 35 minutes and then they play like a team fight. Like, okay. I can say that he's an excellent like team fighter, has great positioning, has like good awareness, but his team plays around him, right? And I'm not saying that makes him that's like a knock on him. I'm saying that like what would make the best AD carry for me is someone who can take over the first 10 minutes, can also like direct his team to make movements towards a specific objective, and then really like pressure at different times during the game and at different key moments, rather than just like a specific like yeah. But I mean the problem is that there's no other standout AD carry also, other than like, I mean, I mentioned that I think Kramer is excellent in like all phases of the game as well, and then you have Prey and Deft, and I think Deft still just like he's so consistent most of the time, and then every now and then I see like something like a really big question mark, and that's what's AD carry is one of the roles where it's really hard for me to judge who is the best, whereas like mid, top, bottom, or mid, top, support, and even jungle, like I like have much stronger opinions about.
Okay. You see, that's another thing about him.
I think it's Prey.
He's one of those people who has to tell you that. Like, he can't just say the first part of the sentence, which is like, AD carry is one of the only positions I have a hard time gauging. Whereas I can gauge, and then he names all the other positions. It's like, yeah, we got it there. We get that's a kind of a redundant end to the sentence there, but you're very thorough, though. Very thorough. Okay, come on then. Why is Prey the best? I can step in
and say that I still think it's Prey. I think he's definitely overshadowed by a lot of individual outplays that his teammates have. But if you just watch him in team fights, and yes, it's on Ezreal, a champion that he's been playing since season 2, right? That's like one of the champions he came out playing. Like, he is just so good in these team fights. Like, he's plus just outstanding.
You know that doesn't really work as a knock against someone. I mean, I don't see like Alex Ich just fucking wrecking everyone on Rise still. Like, you know, it's still pretty hard to play the champion 7 years later or whatever. Like,
well, I know like some people are just like, well, obviously he knows how to play Ezreal. It's like, well, that doesn't change the fact that he's just a god in team fights. I think you can totally make the point that at times Teddy has been the best performing AD carry. I think he's definitely up there, but I don't think there's any AD carry that still comes close to me to Prey, and for me in terms of what he can do in a game. And you've even seen like sometimes when Kingzone has found themselves maybe on the back foot or retreating from team fights, and Prey just goes off, and it's just he has. I mean, you haven't seen it yet, this split really, outside of a few Kalista engages, but he has such a strong initiation sense, especially paired with Gorilla, who's a support that also has a very strong initiation sense. And he just has like stellar team fighting, stellar trading in lane. Like, he is still, to me, the best AD carry, despite the fact that I think you could make a case at sometimes where Teddy is the best performing AD carry in that moment, because his team's playing around him. I think One thing that is slightly underrated is the fact that Teddy is also an incredible laner. He's so strong in lane, and he has a really good understanding of trading in a 2v2 or even in a 1v2. But I still think that he doesn't have the same kind of I haven't seen from him the same kind of initiation sense I've seen from Prey, and maybe that is unfair because I've seen obviously a lot more of Prey than I've seen of Teddy. But he still doesn't come close to being as well-rounded as Prey, and Prey is still just popping off with peerless positioning in some of these team fights. So I still think it's Prey.
Yeah, for sure. And also, like, as soon as you started talking about, like, when you saw Prey popping off, I was thinking about the KZ versus KT game, where normally AD carries just sit there and get demolished by Camille. And there's this one engage where Score is coming in, like they're trying to defend their tier 2 mid, and he's coming in with the hook shot. And as he's like right as he's about to touch Prey like ease over the wall at an angle that you don't expect at all on Ezreal, and he's just completely out. And Score is stuck in the middle of KT or KZ and has to just ult like Braum or something, or not Braum, like Gorilla or Peanut. And it's just he survives, and he survives even when he puts himself in riskier positions than a lot of other AD carries.
One team we haven't talked about until now, because I like to save the tough ones till the end. I wanted Croissant to get warmed up, I put the tough questions to him. Kuro MVP, Teddy best AD carry in the world. I went for all the clickbait. I didn't get any bites on it so far. So here's the real test for you, Croissant, which is analyze for me KT Rolster. Because at the moment, they're the third best team in LCK. They've only lost 2 series. They've won a lot of games. Everything on paper looks great. But with the lineup KT has, basically, unless you're the champion, people are going to say there's something wrong. So how do you analyze KT Rolster at the moment? What do you make of them?
I feel like this is actually a matter of like the little mistakes that players make, right? That we mentioned, or we talked a little bit about earlier. And I feel like every single one of their players is not playing like flawlessly, and not just not playing flawlessly, but has like, if we say that the top players on KZ are making like 2 to 3 mistakes, like punishable mistakes in the first 10 minutes of the game or first 20 minutes of the game, you could say that KT are making like 1.5 to 2 times as many mistakes as that top team, right? And like I can see that in like the specific like laning decisions that, or like how aware the laners are of junglers from Smeb and from Pawn. And then I also see that in the way that they just move from like when they play specifically from like the 15 to 25 minute mark, it feels slow, and it doesn't feel like they're pushing with as much urgency and as much purpose as that I saw them play with in 2017. And it feels like, yeah, they're like one of the only other teams other than the world champions to keep their roster. And you have to wonder, like, are they too comfortable with each other, and are they stumped as to how they can continue to grow as a team and like really retake the top spot? And I just find it a little bit sad, because they were a team that I always wanted to like go to Worlds and like really show like everything that they had to offer. And even though they're like a top 3 team right now in the LCK, like it kind of feels that their current progress, like they're better than SKT right now, but it doesn't feel like that's a definite, and that's like a thing that you can be sure of for a long period of time, you know? That's about those are my like first impression thoughts on KT.
Okay, come on, Emily. What's going on with this team? Has anything changed?
I've tilted about KT so much on this show already. So I think like last week, because they had just come off of the King Zone loss, I ranted a lot about how, I didn't want to see Score on Jungle Camille anymore, how I felt like they were, even though the second game was closer, I felt like they didn't really come in with like a strong understanding of how they wanted to beat KZ, and it definitely showed. I think, oddly enough, so you go into a match with KT against a team like Kongdu, right? Who are, again, like, it's sad to say because I think Kongdu are still performing better than I ever thought they would, but they're still not a strong team in Korea. And they're a team that, like what we saw with the KT against the ROX Tigers a few weeks ago, they're a team that you would expect KT to come in and maybe play a little bit faster and loose around how they want to attack this team. And I actually think, oddly enough, the Kongdu series, even though it was KT 2-0, they played these again, like very easy to execute team compositions with, Pana and Talia, Rise. Smeb got to play Camille, but it was in a game where Score was playing Zach, and then they had a deft on the Caitlyn. I think they went in and they decided to play these kind of strong pushing compositions that didn't necessarily have a very high degree of difficulty, and they didn't necessarily come in with that same mindset that I saw from ROX, where they're just going to kind of style on their opponents. And it was weirdly, it made me slightly more optimistic about this team. But again, like the King Zone loss was very crushing because I was hoping that they'd do more to maybe attack bot lane and leave topside on its own. And Score was really ineffective coming out of the jungle. I thought Peanut had some really good early pathing on both Sejuani and Zach in that series. And yeah, it's weird. It's weird to say because the Kongdu series is the only one that's passed since I last talked about KT. But that oddly gave me a sliver of hope for KT because it seemed like they returned to the drawing board and they're like, okay, let's just play something that's very simple. Let's put Pawn on something where he can just, wave clear mid and then maybe affect side lanes like the Talia Rise. And that, I guess, gives me hope going forward. Like, I guess I hope they continue on that track where they take what they were really good at last year, to Croissant's point, which was pushing lanes, and then having really strong mid-game understanding of what they had to do in order to win quickly. And I kind of want them to return to the drawing board and go for more stuff like that, where they're just pushing and then transitioning into the mid-game and then closing out after like first or second Baron, which is, again, the meta has shifted, so it's a little bit more difficult to do that now. But the Kongdu series was weirdly hopeful, and not because I think Kongdu are like super, super good, but because I saw them not just trying to kind of one up them, right? Like I saw them just going in and playing well.
Okay. Right. How about this? So I'll go through some of the big games for next week and just give me your thoughts on who wins and maybe a comment on why. So KT plays KSV in one of the first games of next week. Who wins this game, Croissant?
KT wins because even though I want to see more like aggression from KT, and that they're like, specifically I want to see Smeb return to like his peak form. I think what they have right now is perfectly fine. And like as Emily said, in a way, even though the style that they played against Kongdu wasn't what I want to see from them long term, it's like what they need against KSV specifically. So I think that's like I think it's a pretty straightforward win for them.
Okay. Who do you pick, Emily?
I would also pick KT. Just because even though, so like I've harped on KT for making the same mistakes that they did last year, for overestimating when they can be aggressive, and having other teams capitalize on that. And KSV previously could definitely beat that. But the KSV that we saw this past week, and obviously they'll have a week break because of the Lunar New Year, so maybe KSV can figure it out in that time frame. But based on what we saw from both of these teams in week 4, I would give it to KT.
Okay. Right. What about when ROX Tigers plays SK Telecom? Who's going to win this match, Croissant?
I think SKT loses, but it's a close call for me, 55-45, because I see Songhwan and Linderang really punishing Dahl, and I don't think SKT are like they're on an upswing, but there's not like, it's not clear that they're solid enough yet to really take down ROX, who have like their developed style and their clear game plan. And again, it's like really close, but I can see ROX winning that matchup.
Okay. Emily?
I mean, I think ROX know what they want to do with their team a lot more than what SKT does right now. Both teams make a lot of mistakes, so I think it's going to be a 2-1. I'd like to give the edge to ROX because of topside. I think the main issue, though, is that I'm a little bit worried about Lava against Faker. Because as I said before, they focused on giving Lava some picks where he can just kind of sit in lane. The Zoe is one, but also you have him playing the Corki. He's played Galio. And these are champions that, interestingly enough, what I said about SKT before is that I want to see them doing something like ROX, or continuing to do something like ROX, right? Where they're picking easy to execute team competitions to make things easier for Blossom and Tall on topside. So this is actually a really interesting matchup to me, depending on how draft goes, and how SKT decide to attack ROX in draft. And also because I'm thinking that, oddly enough, both of these teams are going to be going in looking to draft very, very similar compositions, which is interesting. I still want to give the edge to ROX because I think they're playing as a team a lot better, like as a unified 5. I think they're playing in a more coordinated fashion. But again, the week break could give SKT that time to improve. And then I am worried about SKT exploiting ROX through mid lane, because Lava is certainly not as not even anywhere close to the ability of Faker. So that is also an issue that you're going to have to watch out for. But again, as these teams are in week 4, I would still give the edge to ROX.
Okay. So obviously we referred earlier, the marquee matchup, the one everyone's waiting for, is Africa versus Kingzone. So rather than just ask who wins it, does anyone want to take Africa to win this game?
I said Kingzone would win earlier, I'm pretty sure. So I'm still taking Kingzone just based on the mistakes that both teams are making right now. I think Kingzone makes less mistakes, and I think they will be able to match Africa.
Okay.
But I think it'll be a 2-1. I think it'll be a 2-1, actually. I think Africa will break their game win streak.
Okay. What do you think, Croissant?
Real quick, I have a question. What do you think about the value of like calling a game after you see the draft? Do you think that's like less valuable than projecting what's going to happen like a week in advance, or like the day before?
I mean, here's the thing. for me, they're two different types of analysis. Right?
Yeah.
Like one of them, basically, you can't really know the draft, so you're generally just thinking like strategically, how do they match up? Like generally, what they want to do. You can't know the specific tactics necessarily because you won't know the champions. You're right. So I think they both have value. Like I like the preview sense, but I also do like I would love a world in which people didn't just sit back and go, oh, they drafted badly after the game was over. I'd love people to say after the draft, like, no, this was like, they're really heavily favored. They're going to win in this way. That's actually why one person, for everyone who's watching this show, I know he doesn't do Korea, but who I actually enjoy reading his Twitter, is that guy who's now the coach of Splice, Peter Dunn, because that's exactly how he tweets. What he does in his tweets is he just tells you based on the draft, what someone picked, what they're probably going for here, what they gave up to do so. That's like straight fire analysis. I love it. It doesn't have to have any right or wrong element to it. It's just his takes. Okay, yeah. What were you going to go with?
Yeah, I think Afrika. I think they'll get to it by KC, but I do a similar, or I try to do a similar thing where I like tweet after I watch a draft and explain like what my logic is, and I will definitely do that for KT versus KZ. Because
well, let me ask you this then. So when KT play, Afrika versus KZ is what we
yeah. Oh yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Just checking. Okay, but let me ask you this then. So since that gave you some sort of pause, is there something in the draft that Afrika can potentially do that gives them a chance? Is that what you were thinking of?
Yeah, I don't know who's blue side or who's red side first, but like if Afrika gets red side first and they counterpick for Keen and they have they get a priority jungler for Spirit, then I would expect Afrika to win game 1 and then KZ to just like take the next 2 games, because I think they're more like a more solid team and therefore more adaptable throughout the series.
I'm Kelsey Moser, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel, where no sandbagging goes unscrutinized.
This video was supported by Dean Tanglis, Michael Allaire, Andreas Westerlund, Alex Adams, Gman, Twch, Jerky's Minion, Anthony, TGreb, Jake Petrucci, Yordan Tsenkov, Daniel Yordanov. Want to get exclusive teasers for my upcoming work? Submit questions for me or make suggestions for my content? Become a part of the ever-growing Scrilluminati via Patreon link in the description box below.